The coffee shop manager's voice cut through the morning rush like a blade, sharp enough that the entire cafe fell silent, and I felt every eye turn toward me as he held up the broken espresso machine portafilter, his face red with an anger that seemed disproportionate to the actual offense. "This is the third time this week, Elena," he said, and I wanted to tell him that the equipment was old, that the gaskets were worn, that I'd been asking him to order replacements for months. But the words died in my throat because I saw it in his eyes. He'd been looking for an excuse, any excuse, and I'd finally given him one. My hands shook as I untied my apron, the green fabric suddenly feeling like a noose around my neck, and I didn't cry, wouldn't cry. Not here in front of the other baristas who were pretending not to watch, not in front of the customers who were recording this on their phones because public humiliation was entertainment now. I handed him the apron, took my bag from the hook in the back room where my master's degree in early childhood education hung in a frame as a reminder of dreams deferred, and I walked out into the Chicago morning with $37 in my bank account and rent due in 4 days. The October wind off Lake Michigan bit through my thin jacket, and I pulled it tighter around myself as I walked. No destination in mind, because going back to my studio apartment meant facing the reality of my situation, and I wasn't ready for that yet. The city moved around me in its usual chaos. Business people in expensive suits hurrying to meetings, tourists taking photos of the architecture, street performers setting up for the day. And I felt invisible among them, just another struggling 26-year-old woman whose student loans were crushing her, whose mother's medical bills from last year's cancer treatment were still coming in, whose dreams of working with children in a meaningful way had been reduced to making coffee for people who didn't see her as human. I found myself walking toward the Gold Coast, that neighborhood of impossible wealth where I used to take the train to interview for nanny positions with families who would smile politely at my credentials and then hire someone with the right connections, the right references, the right everything that I didn't have. The mansion appeared like something from a different century, all stone and iron gates and security cameras that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. And I was standing across the street staring at it like an idiot when the gates swung open and a black SUV tore out so fast that I had to jump back onto the sidewalk. Through the passenger window, I saw a woman's face, perfectly made up, designer sunglasses, mouth set in a grim line, and she was saying something angry to the driver before the vehicle disappeared into traffic. I should have kept walking, should have gone home and started applying for new jobs, but something about the desperation in that woman's expression caught me, held me there on the sidewalk as I watched the gates begin to close. A man in a dark suit appeared in the opening, security detail obviously, and he looked at me with the kind of assessment that made my skin prickle. But then he spoke into his wrist and the gates stopped closing. "You looking for work?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he could break me in half without trying. And I nodded because what else was I going to do, go home and cry? He gestured for me to come closer, and every instinct I had screamed that this was dangerous, that walking through those gates meant entering a world I didn't understand, but desperation made people do stupid things. "The boss needs someone to clean," he continued as I approached, his eyes still scanning me, cataloging everything. "The last maid quit this morning. You got experience." I thought about my studio apartment that I kept immaculate, about the houses I cleaned in college to pay for textbooks, about how I was standing there without a job or prospects, and I lied. "Yes," I told him, "I have experience," and he nodded, spoke into his wrist again, and the gates opened wider. The grounds were massive, all manicured lawns and sculpted hedges, and a fountain that probably cost more than my entire life. And as I followed the security guard up the circular driveway, I noticed other men in dark suits positioned at strategic points, their attention constantly moving, scanning for threats that I couldn't imagine. The mansion itself was beautiful in a cold way, all modern glass and stone that spoke of wealth so vast it didn't need to be warm, and I felt profoundly out of place in my coffee-stained jeans and clearance rack jacket. The guard led me to a side entrance, not the grand front door with its iron and glass design, and I understood immediately, staff entrance, because people like me didn't walk through the front door of places like this. Inside, the house was even more intimidating, all marble floors and soaring ceilings and art that I recognized from my art history elective as pieces that belonged in museums. A woman in her 50s appeared, dressed in a pristine black uniform, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and she looked me up and down with an expression that made the coffee shop manager's anger seem warm by comparison. "Maria," the guard said by way of introduction. He he paused, and I realized he'd never asked my name. Elena, I supplied quickly, Elena Vasquez, and Maria's expression didn't change, didn't soften, but she dismissed the guard with a nod and gestured for me to follow her deeper into the house. The previous maid left rather suddenly. Maria said as we walked through a kitchen that could service a restaurant, all commercial appliances and granite counters. And Mr. Moretti needs someone who can be discreet, who understands that what happens in this house stays in this house. The way she emphasized discreet made my stomach tighten because I wasn't stupid. I knew what kind of man lived in a house like this, with security like this, with the kind of wealth that radiated from every surface. Maria continued, "You'll clean the main living areas, the kitchen, the upstairs guest rooms, but you do not enter Mr. Moretti's office. You do not enter his private suite, and you absolutely do not go to the third floor." She stopped walking and turned to face me fully, and her eyes were hard. "The third floor is for the boy, and he has particular needs. Do you understand?" I nodded, though I didn't understand at all, and Maria seemed satisfied enough with my response to continue the tour. She showed me where the cleaning supplies were kept, explained the daily routine, told me that I'd be paid in cash at the end of each day, and the amount she named was more than I made in a week at the coffee shop. It should have made me suspicious, should have sent me running back through those gates. But I thought about my rent, about my mother's bills, about the electricity that was going to be shut off if I didn't pay the overdue notice, and I accepted. Maria told me to start with the living room, handed me a caddy of expensive cleaning products, and left me alone in a space bigger than my entire apartment. I was on my knees polishing the marble floor around a glass coffee table when I heard it, a sound like an animal in pain, high-pitched and desperate, coming from somewhere above me. I froze, cloth in hand, and the sound came again, louder this time, and I recognized it as a child's scream, full of rage and fear and something else I couldn't name. Footsteps thundered on the stairs, and Maria appeared with another woman in tow, this one younger and dressed in expensive business casual, her face blotchy with tears. "I can't," the young woman was saying, her voice shaking. "I just can't, he's not normal, there's something wrong with him." And Maria was trying to calm her, to quiet her, but the woman just kept talking. "He threw a book at my head, he locked himself in the bathroom, he won't speak, he just screams, and I have a master's degree in child psychology. I've worked with difficult children, but this is—" She stopped when she saw me watching, and her expression shifted to something like pity before Maria hustled her toward the side entrance. The screaming continued, rhythmic now, like the child had settled into it, and I should have kept cleaning, should have stayed down there like Maria instructed, but my degree in early childhood education was whispering in my ear, telling me that this wasn't normal tantrum behavior, that something else was happening. I moved toward the stairs, my heart pounding because I was violating the rules on my first day, but I couldn't help it. I'd always been drawn to broken things, always wanted to fix them. The second floor was quieter than the first, thicker carpet muffling sound, and I followed the screaming to a door at the end of the hall that was vibrating with the force of whatever was happening on the other side. I knocked, soft at first, then louder when the screaming didn't stop, and I called out, "Hey, sweetie, it's okay," in the voice I used to use with the toddlers during my student teaching, calm and steady and warm. The screaming stopped abruptly, and in the sudden silence, I heard my own breathing, loud and fast. I tried the door handle, expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily, and I pushed the door open to reveal a bedroom that looked like a war zone. Books scattered across the floor, furniture overturned, stuffed animals torn apart. And in the center of it all, a small boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with dark hair and eyes that were too old for his face. He was holding a picture book like a weapon, ready to throw it, and we stared at each other for a long moment. "Hi," I said softly, not moving into the room, staying in the doorway because approaching him felt like approaching a wild animal. "I'm Elena. I'm new here." The boy didn't respond, just watched me with those ancient eyes, and I noticed details. The way his chest was heaving from screaming, the tear tracks on his cheeks, the defensive set of his shoulders. "That looks like a really good book," I continued, nodding toward the one in his hands, and I recognized it as a picture book about emotions, the kind I used to read in my child development classes. "Do you want to read it together?" I lowered myself to sit cross-legged in the doorway, making myself smaller, less threatening, and I could see him processing this, trying to decide if I was a danger or not. "No ladies," he said finally, his voice hoarse from screaming, and it was the first time he'd spoken, according to the reports Maria mentioned earlier, in 3 months. "No ladies stay. They leave. They're mean." His grammar was good, his pronunciation clear, and I realized that this child was intelligent, possibly gifted, and that intelligence was part of the problem. "I'm not here to be your nanny," I told him honestly, because lying to children never worked, they always knew. "I'm here to clean the house. But I saw your room, and it looks like maybe you could use some help picking things up." I gestured to the chaos around him, and he looked at it as if seeing it for the first time, and something like shame crossed his face. "I was mad," he said, lowering the book slightly, "at the lady. She said I was broken." The word broke my heart, and I had to swallow hard before I could respond. "You're not broken," I told him firmly. "You're just sad, and that's okay. It's okay to be sad. But throwing books at people isn't okay, even when we're sad." He considered this, his small face serious, and then he did something that stopped my breath. He walked toward me, slow and cautious, and held out the book. I took it carefully, and he sat down next to me in the doorway, close enough that I could smell the expensive shampoo in his hair, the scent of child sweat and tears. We sat like that for several minutes, not speaking, just existing together in the wreckage of his room, and then he said, quiet as a whisper, "What's your name again?" I repeated it, Elena, and he tested it on his tongue, Elena, drawing out the syllables. "I'm Luca," he told me, and I smiled at him. "It's nice to meet you, Luca," I said, and I meant it despite everything. "Do you want to help me pick up your books?" He nodded, and we worked together in silence, and I noticed that he organized them by color without being asked, that his movements were precise and careful, that he counted them under his breath as we stacked them on the shelf. We were almost finished when the door at the end of the hall opened, and I heard footsteps, measured and slow, and then a voice that made every hair on my body stand up said, "Who are you, and what are you doing with my son?" I turned, still on my knees surrounded by stuffed animals, and I saw him for the first time. Dante Moretti, though I didn't know his name yet, just knew that he was the most dangerous man I'd ever seen. He was tall, over 6 feet easily, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car, and his face was all sharp angles and cold beauty, dark hair styled perfectly, eyes so dark they looked black in the dim hallway light. But it wasn't his appearance that froze me. It was the absolute stillness of him, the way he held himself like a predator that didn't need to advertise his threat because everyone already knew. I started, and my voice came out shaky. "I work here, I'm the new maid, I heard Luca and I just wanted to help." And I was babbling now, scrambling to my feet, very aware that I'd violated the rules, that I was on the 3rd floor where I'd been explicitly told not to go. Dante Moretti's eyes moved from me to his son, and I saw something flicker in them, something almost like pain before his expression locked down again. "Luca doesn't respond well to strangers," he said, his voice deep and rough, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place, "especially women." But even as he said it, Luca got up from where he'd been sitting and walked to his father, and then, inexplicably, he reached back and took my hand, pulling me with him. "She's nice, Papa," Luca said, and I heard the desperation in his voice, the "please don't make her leave" that he was too young to articulate properly. She didn't yell. She sat with me. Dante's eyes dropped to where his son's small hand was wrapped around my fingers, and the expression on his face was so complex I couldn't begin to parse it. Surprise, suspicion, something that might have been hope, and underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion. "Did she?" he said softly, and it wasn't a question. He moved closer, and I fought the urge to step back because I understood instinctively that showing fear to this man would be a mistake. Up close, I could see the faint scar along his jaw, the shadow of stubble, the way his eyes were bloodshot as if he hadn't slept in days. "What's your name?" he asked, and I told him again, Elena Vasquez, and he repeated it the way his son had, testing it, tasting it. "Maria hired you," he said, and I nodded, explaining quickly about the coffee shop, about being in the right place at the right time, about how I just wanted to help when I heard Luca crying. I didn't mention my degree, because I was afraid if I did, he'd see me as another nanny, another person trying to fix his son, and that was clearly not what either of them needed. Dante listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, and when I finished, he was quiet for so long that I thought he was going to fire me before I'd even really started. But then Luca tugged on my hand again and said, "Can Elena help me clean my room?" And Dante's gaze sharpened, focused entirely on his son. "You want her to stay?" Dante asked, and his voice had changed, become softer, more careful, and I realized that this man, this dangerous man who radiated violence and power, was completely undone by his child. Luca nodded vigorously, and then he said the words that changed everything. "She's nice like Mommy was." The silence that followed was suffocating, and I saw Dante's throat work as he swallowed hard, saw his hands clench at his sides, and I understood suddenly that Luca's mother was gone, that this was why the boy was so broken, why he wouldn't speak to the nannies, why he screamed and threw things. Dante crouched down to his son's level, and the movement was surprisingly graceful for a man his size, and he touched Luca's cheek with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about him. "Okay," Dante said, and his voice was rough. "Elena can stay and help you clean your room." He stood, and his eyes found mine again, and this time there was a warning in them, clear as words. "We'll discuss your new responsibilities later," he told me, and I understood that I was no longer just a maid, that I'd somehow been promoted or demoted. I wasn't sure which, into something else entirely. He left without another word, his footsteps retreating down the hallway, and I was left standing in Luca's disaster of a room with the child's hand still in mine, wondering what I'd just gotten myself into. Luca and I spent the next 2 hours putting his room back together, and as we worked, he talked to me in bursts, sharing things that seemed random but that I recognized as trust-building. He told me about his favorite dinosaur, a brachiosaurus, about how he hated broccoli but loved carrots, about the dog he wanted but his father wouldn't let him have. He didn't mention his mother again, and I didn't ask, understanding that this was a wound too fresh to prod. When the room was finally clean, Luca looked around with something like satisfaction, and then he yawned, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard. "Are you tired?" I asked, and he nodded, rubbing his eyes with small fists, and without thinking, I led him to his bed, helped him climb in, and pulled the covers up. "Will you read to me?" he asked, his voice already drowsy, and I picked up the emotion book from earlier, the one he'd been going to throw at the nanny, and I sat on the edge of his bed and began to read. His room was decorated in a way that spoke of money but not warmth, expensive furniture, designer bedding, educational toys. But there were no personal touches, no photos on the walls, no evidence of the mother he'd mentioned. I read through the book twice, and by the second time, Luca's eyes were closing, his breathing evening out, and I thought he was asleep when he whispered, "Stay. Please stay, Elena." And I promised I would, at least until he woke up, and I sat there watching him sleep, this small broken boy in his enormous room, and I felt something shift in my chest, something dangerous and warm. I didn't know how long I sat there before I sensed someone watching, and I turned to find Dante standing in the doorway, his jacket off now, his tie loosened, and his expression was unguarded in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "He's asleep," I whispered unnecessarily, and Dante nodded, moving into the room with that same predatory grace, and he stood at the foot of the bed looking at his son. "He hasn't let anyone read to him since." He stopped, swallowed, started again. "It's been 3 months. I did the mental math, realized that 3 months ago something had happened, something that broke both of them. And I wanted to ask, but I didn't because it wasn't my place." "You're not a maid," Dante said suddenly, his eyes moving from Luca to me, and it was a statement, not a question. "I can tell by the way you handled him, the way you spoke to him. You have training." I considered lying, but something about the intensity of his gaze made me tell the truth. "I have a master's degree in early childhood education," I admitted, "but I couldn't find work in the field, so I was making coffee until this morning when I got fired." His expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes, recognition or understanding, or maybe just calculation. "And you just happened to be outside my gates," he said, skepticism clear in his tone, and I bristled. "I was taking a walk after the worst morning of my life," I told him, "and I saw your gates open, and your security guard asked if I wanted work, and I said yes because I'm desperate, not because I had some master plan to infiltrate your house." The words came out sharper than I intended, and I braced myself for his anger, but instead he smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look less like a dangerous man and more like someone who understood dark humor. "Fair enough," he said, and then he was all business again. "I'll triple what Maria offered you if you stay with Luca full-time. Not as a nanny. He's been through 7 nannies in 3 months, but as whatever this is." He gestured between his sleeping son and me, and I understood what he was asking, understood that he was desperate enough to hire a stranger off the street if it meant Luca would be okay. "What happened to his mother?" I asked because I needed to know, needed to understand what I was walking into, and Dante's expression shut down completely, became a mask of control and cold distance. "That's not your concern," he said, his voice hard, and I felt the dismissal like a physical blow. All you need to know is that she's gone, that Luca needs stability, and that I will do anything, to help my son. The threat was implicit, the promise of violence if I hurt Luca, if I failed him, and I should have been terrified, should have run screaming from this house. But instead I found myself nodding, accepting terms I didn't fully understand with a man who was essentially a stranger. I'll need to know his routines, his triggers, his developmental history, I said, slipping into professional mode because it was easier than thinking about the reality of what I was agreeing to, and Dante nodded, told me we could discuss it in the morning, that for now I should go home and come back early tomorrow. He told me Maria would give me an advance on my salary, enough to cover my immediate needs, and I wanted to refuse because taking money from him felt like signing a contract written in blood. But I thought about my rent, about my mother's bills, and I accepted. He walked me downstairs himself, and I was hyper-aware of his presence behind me, the heat of him, the controlled power in every movement, and when we reached the front entrance, the main door, not the staff entrance I'd come through, he stopped me with a hand on my arm. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was rough with an emotion I couldn't name, for helping him, for seeing him. His hand was large and warm on my arm, and I could feel calluses on his palm, evidence of violence or work or both. And when he released me, I felt the absence of his touch like a cold spot. Maria appeared with an envelope thick with cash, and I took it without counting it, tucking it into my bag. Dante's driver took me home in the black SUV, and the security guard from the gate, whose name I learned was Marcus, walked me to my apartment door, and I realized as I watched him check the hallway before leaving that I was now under Dante Moretti's protection, whether I wanted to be or not. That night, I lay awake in my narrow bed and Googled Dante Moretti, and the search results made my stomach drop. The legitimate articles called him a real estate developer and philanthropist, but the forums and gossip sites told a different story. Connections to organized crime, allegations of money laundering, whispers about the Moretti family's control over Chicago's underground. There were photos of him at charity galas, always in expensive suits, always with a beautiful woman on his arm. And then there were photos from 3 months ago, a funeral, him in black, his face a mask of grief, and a small boy, Luca, being led away by a woman I assumed was Maria. The headlines screamed about his wife's death, about the tragedy of losing her so young, and I searched for more information but found only speculation, rumors, conspiracy theories that made my skin crawl. I should have backed out, should have called Maria in the morning and told her I couldn't do this, but I thought about Luca's small hand in mine, his voice saying, "She's nice like Mommy was," and I knew I wouldn't. I'd always been drawn to broken things, always wanted to fix them, and these two, this dangerous man and his traumatized son, were the most broken things I'd ever encountered. I finally slept as the sun was rising, and I dreamed of dark eyes and small hands, and the feeling of stepping through a gate that was closing behind me. The next morning, Marcus picked me up at 6, and the drive to the mansion was quiet except for the sound of morning traffic. He didn't try to make small talk, and I was grateful for it because I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since my thesis defense, all jumpy energy and second-guessing. When we arrived, Maria met me at the staff entrance, and her expression was still severe, but there was something else now, a grudging approval, or maybe just resignation. "Mr. Moretti wants to see you in his office before you go to Luca," she said, and my stomach tightened because the office had been explicitly off-limits yesterday, and now I was being summoned there like a medieval servant before a king. She led me through parts of the house I hadn't seen yesterday, past rooms that were clearly unused, their furniture covered in sheets, and I realized that despite its size, this mansion wasn't really lived in. It was a fortress, not a home. The office was on the first floor, down a hallway that had more security cameras than seemed necessary, and Maria knocked once before opening the door and gesturing me inside. The office was exactly what I'd expected: massive desk, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds, leather furniture, and books that looked expensive and unread. Dante was standing at the window when I entered, his back to me, and he didn't turn around immediately, leaving me to stand there awkwardly while he finished whatever he was doing. "Close the door," he said without turning, and I did, and the sound of it clicking shut felt final, like I'd sealed myself in with a predator. He turned then, and in the morning light, I could see him more clearly than I had yesterday. He was probably in his early 30s, though he carried himself older, and there was a hardness to him that spoke of violence and control and absolute confidence in his power. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from his desk, and I sat because my legs were shaking and I didn't trust them to hold me. "I had you investigated last night," Dante said, moving to sit behind his desk, and his bluntness caught me off guard, made me blink stupidly at him. Elena Vasquez, 26, master's degree from University of Illinois, student loans totaling $93,000, mother in Phoenix with stage 3 breast cancer in remission, father deceased, no siblings, no criminal record, no significant relationships. He recited my life like he was reading from a file, and I felt violated, exposed, angry at how easily he'd dissected me. "You're not a threat," he continued, "but you're desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. Is there a point to this?" I asked, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, and I saw surprise flicker across his face before he smiled, that same dark smile from last night. "The point is that I need to know who I'm letting near my son," he said, leaning back in his chair. "And now I do. You're qualified, you're broke, and you clearly have a savior complex based on your volunteer work with foster children during grad school." I wanted to argue with him, wanted to tell him that he didn't know me at all, but everything he'd said was true, and we both knew it. "I'm offering you a full-time position," Dante continued, "as Luca's companion. Not his nanny, not his teacher, just someone to be with him, help him adjust, help him heal." He named a salary that made my eyes widen, more money than I'd ever made, more than seemed reasonable for what he was describing. "You'll live here, in one of the guest suites near Luca's room, and you'll be available whenever he needs you. In exchange, I pay off your student loans, cover your mother's medical expenses, and provide a salary of $10,000 per month." The numbers were so absurd that I almost laughed, but his expression was deadly serious, and I realized he meant every word. "Why?" I asked, because I needed to understand, needed to know why he was offering me this fortune when he could hire someone with better credentials, better references, better everything. "Because my son called you nice like Mommy was," Dante said, and his voice cracked on the word mommy, just slightly, just enough that I saw the grief underneath his control. "Because in 3 months, you're the first person who's gotten through to him. Because I'm watching my child disappear, and I don't know how to save him, and I'm desperate enough to trust a stranger if it means he comes back to me." The honesty was brutal, raw, and I saw him fully for the first time. Not as a dangerous man, but as a terrified father who would do anything, sacrifice anything, to save his son. "What if it doesn't work?" I asked, because I needed him to know that there were no guarantees, that trauma didn't heal on a convenient timeline, that I might fail. "Then you fail," Dante said simply. "But at least we tried. At least I did everything I could." He stood, moved around the desk, and held out his hand, and I understood that this was the moment of commitment, the point where I either walked away or stepped fully into this strange, dark world. I took his hand, and his grip was firm, warm, and I felt the calluses again, wondered what violence those hands had done. But I pushed the thought away because right now, in this moment, I was making a choice to help a child, and everything else was secondary. "I'll need to go to my apartment and pack," I told him, and he nodded, told me Marcus would take me and help me move my things, that I could take today to settle in and start fresh with Luca tomorrow. "One more thing," he said as I was turning to leave, and his voice stopped me at the door. "There are parts of my life, my business, that you'll see or hear about. Things that might frighten you or make you question this decision." He paused, and when I turned back, his expression was hard again, controlled. "If you ever feel unsafe, if you ever want to leave, you can. But if you stay, if you choose to be part of Luca's life, then you're also choosing to be part of mine. And that means accepting things you might not understand or agree with." "Are you warning me or threatening me?" I asked, and he considered the question seriously before answering. "Both," he said, "and neither. I'm telling you the truth because you deserve to know what you're walking into. My world is dangerous, Elena. People want to hurt me, and they might try to use you or Luca to do it. If you stay, you'll have security, you'll have protection, but you'll also have rules, boundaries that you can't cross for your own safety." I should have been terrified, should have run screaming from this house and this man and this offer that came with so many strings. But instead I found myself nodding, accepting, stepping fully through the gate that had been closing since the moment I'd walked through it yesterday. Marcus drove me to my apartment, and he helped me pack my meager belongings. Clothes that suddenly seemed shabby, books and photos, my degree in its frame. And I realized how small my life had been, how limited. I left a note for my landlord, paid him the rent I owed with cash from the envelope Dante had given me yesterday, and I closed the door on that chapter of my life without looking back. The drive to the mansion was surreal, And I found myself thinking about fairy tales, about girls who entered magical worlds and could never return, and I wondered if that was what was happening to me, if I was disappearing into something I couldn't come back from. The guest suite Maria showed me to was bigger than my entire apartment, all soft grays and silvers with furniture that was modern and comfortable. And there was a bathroom with a tub deep enough to swim in and a walk-in closet that made me laugh because I didn't have enough clothes to fill a quarter of it. She told me that dinner was at 6, that Luca was with his tutor until 4, that I should rest and settle in today, and we'd establish routines tomorrow. After she left, I unpacked slowly, hanging my cheap clothes next to the empty space, and I felt like an imposter, like someone playing dress-up in a life that didn't belong to her. I was exploring the suite, opening drawers and cabinets, when there was a knock on my door, and I opened it to find Luca standing there in his school clothes, his small face serious. "You came back," he said, and there was wonder in his voice, relief, and I realized that he'd expected me to disappear like everyone else. "I promised I would," I reminded him, crouching down to his level, and he nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Do you want to see my playroom?" he asked, and I followed him down the hall to a room that was every child's dream. Toys and books and a climbing structure and art supplies. But like his bedroom, it felt sterile, unlived in, and I understood that Luca hadn't been playing, hadn't been being a child. We spent the afternoon together, and I let him lead, let him show me things at his own pace, and I observed everything. The way he organized his toys by color and size, the way he spoke in complete sentences but struggled with emotional vocabulary, the way he watched doors as if expecting someone to leave. He was gifted, clearly, probably testing several years above his age in cognitive development, but he was also deeply traumatized, and I started to form a mental plan for how to help him, techniques from my training, but also just basic human connection, time and patience and consistency. Dinner was awkward, served in a formal dining room that felt too large for the three of us. Dante sat at the head of the table, Luca to his right, and I was placed to his left, and the symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was being positioned as something more than staff, but less than family, occupying a space that didn't quite exist. Luca picked at his food, and I noticed that he ate in a specific order, vegetables first, then protein, then carbs, and when his fork accidentally touched foods together, he froze, his breathing getting faster. I caught Dante watching this, his jaw tight with helplessness, and without thinking, I reached over and gently separated the offending foods on Luca's plate, and the boy relaxed immediately, shot me a grateful look that made my chest ache. "Tell me about his mother," I said quietly after Luca excused himself to wash his hands, the 4th time during dinner, and Dante's fork clenched in his hand, the metal bending slightly under the pressure. "Her name was Isabella," he said finally, his voice rough as gravel, "and she was the only good thing I'd ever done, the only purely good choice in a life full of bad ones." He didn't elaborate, and I waited, letting the silence stretch until he was ready to fill it. "She died in a car accident 3 months ago. Wrong place, wrong time, a drunk driver who ran a red light." The words were clinical, detached, but I heard the rage underneath them, the grief that had been compressed into something harder, sharper. Luca was with her. He survived without a scratch, but he watched her die, and he hasn't been the same since. The horror of it hit me like a physical blow, and I understood now, the screaming, the need for control, the way Luca watched doors. He was waiting for his mother to come back, and when people left, it confirmed his worst fear that everyone disappeared eventually. "He has PTSD," I said, and it wasn't a question, and Dante nodded. "The doctors said it would take time, that he needs therapy and stability and patience, but every therapist we've tried just makes it worse. He doesn't trust them, doesn't trust anyone." His eyes met mine, dark and intense. "Except apparently you." "I'm not a miracle worker," I told him, needing him to understand this. "I'm just someone who showed up and sat with him. That's all I did." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't quite true. There had been something in that moment with Luca, something that clicked, a recognition between two people who understood loss in different ways. Dante stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and he moved to the window, his back to me, his shoulders rigid with tension. "I need him to be okay," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Because if he's not, if I lose him too, there won't be anything left of me worth saving." The vulnerability in those words, coming from this dangerous man, did something to me, cracked something open in my chest that I'd been keeping carefully locked. I stood and moved toward him without consciously deciding to, and I touched his shoulder lightly, offering comfort the only way I knew how. He went completely still under my touch, and when he turned to face me, his expression was raw, unguarded, and I saw the man underneath the armor, exhausted, grieving, desperate. "We'll help him," I said, using we intentionally, making it a partnership, together. "But you have to trust me, and you have to let me work at his pace, not yours." "I don't trust easily," Dante said, his voice low, dangerous, and his hand came up to cover mine on his shoulder, his fingers warm and strong. "I've built my entire life on control and certainty, and knowing exactly what's going to happen before it happens. And you," he stopped, shook his head, and there was something almost like wonder in his expression. "You walked into my house by accident and turned everything upside down in a day." His thumb stroked across my knuckles, a small movement that sent electricity up my arm, and I realized suddenly how close we were standing, how the air between us had changed, become charged with something I didn't want to name. I pulled my hand back, stepped away, because this, whatever this was, couldn't happen. I was there for Luca, not for his father, and getting involved with Dante Moretti would be a complication I couldn't afford. "I should go check on Luca," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be, and Dante nodded, but his eyes followed me as I left the room, and I could feel his gaze like a physical touch on my skin. The weeks that followed established a rhythm, routine that Luca desperately needed, and that I found surprisingly comforting. We woke early, and I helped him get ready for his day, and we developed small rituals. I let him pick out his clothes, but I arranged them in the order he'd put them on. We sang the alphabet song while he brushed his teeth. We read one chapter of a book at breakfast. His tutor came in the morning, and I observed the sessions, took notes on what triggered his anxiety, and I worked with the tutor, a kind older woman named Mrs. Chun, to adjust the curriculum to meet Luca, where he was rather than where he should have been developmentally. In the afternoons, we played, but I structured it carefully, introducing new activities slowly, always giving him control and choices. We painted, and I discovered he had a talent for color and composition that was remarkable for his age. We built elaborate structures with blocks, and he narrated stories about the people who lived in them, and I heard his trauma woven through the narratives. The mother who left and didn't come back, the father who was always working, the child who was alone. I never corrected these stories, just listened and reflected, and helped him process what he couldn't say directly. Dante watched us sometimes, appearing in doorways unannounced, and I'd catch him standing there with an expression I couldn't quite read. Longing and pain and something that might have been hope. He worked constantly, disappearing into his office for hours, taking calls in Italian that sounded angry and tense, leaving at odd hours and returning even odder ones, always with Marcus or other security personnel. I didn't ask about his business, didn't want to know the details, but I saw evidence of it. The way people deferred to him, the packages that arrived and were immediately taken to his office, the nights when I heard raised voices and then silence. Luca asked about his mother constantly, and I answered his questions honestly but gently, using techniques from grief counseling, helping him understand that loving someone didn't stop when they died, that it was okay to miss her and be angry and sad. We made a memory box together, filling it with photos Maria provided, with drawings Luca made of things he remembered, with a scarf that still smelled like Isabella's perfume. Dante found us working on it one afternoon, and the expression on his face when he saw the photos of his dead wife was so raw that I had to look away. "Can we add this?" Dante asked, his voice rough, and he was holding a small jewelry box, and when he opened it, I saw a delicate gold locket. Luca took it carefully, opened it, and inside were tiny photos. Isabella on one side, Luca as a baby on the other. "Mama's necklace," Luca whispered, and Dante nodded, and then Luca did something he hadn't done since his mother died. He reached for his father, and Dante picked him up, held him close, and I watched them cry together, father and son sharing grief that they'd been carrying separately, and I had to leave the room because my own eyes were burning with tears. That night, Dante came to my suite after Luca was asleep, and I was in pajamas and reading when he knocked. I shouldn't have let him in, should have maintained boundaries, but I opened the door and he looked so lost that I stepped aside. "Thank you," he said, standing in the center of my room, looking out of place and vulnerable, for helping him remember her. "I've been so focused on making him feel better that I forgot he needs to grieve." He ran his hands through his hair, and the gesture was so human, so different from his usual control, that I felt something shift in my chest. "You're allowed to grieve too," I told him softly, and he laughed, but it was bitter. "I don't have that luxury," he said. "Not in my position, not with what I do. People are watching for weakness, waiting for me to break so they can take what's mine. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging his real business. And I didn't push, but I stepped closer, unable to stop myself. Everyone breaks eventually, I said. The strong ones just know how to put themselves back together. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. Is that what you are, Elena? Strong. His voice had dropped, become intimate, and he was moving closer, invading my space the way he did. And I should have stepped back, but I didn't. I don't know, I admitted. I've never had to be this strong before. His hand came up, and he touched my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone, and the touch was gentle but possessive, and I felt it everywhere, felt my body responding in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. You should go, I whispered, but I didn't move away, didn't break the contact, and Dante smiled, dark and knowing. Yes, he agreed. I should, but he didn't move either, and we stood there in the charged silence until finally, with what seemed like enormous effort, he stepped back. Good night, Elena, he said, and his voice was rough with want. And then he was gone, leaving me trembling and confused and angry at myself for feeling things I had no business feeling. The next morning, everything was normal. Luca's routine, breakfast, lessons. But there was a tension in the house that hadn't been there before, something electric and dangerous. Dante was different around me now, more careful but also more attentive, and I caught him watching me with an expression that made my skin heat. Marcus and the other security personnel noticed too. I could tell by the way they looked between us, by the subtle shift in how they treated me, less like staff and more like something else, something protected and valuable. 2 months after I arrived, Luca had his first good day. No meltdowns, no ritualistic behaviors beyond the baseline we'd established as normal for him, just a happy child playing and laughing and being present. At dinner, he told his father about the painting he'd made, about the castle he'd built, about the story Mrs. Chen read, and Dante listened with an attention that was absolute. And when Luca finished, Dante looked at me with such gratitude and something else. Heat, desire, possession, that I had to look away. After Luca went to bed, I was in the library looking for a book when Dante found me. He didn't say anything, just closed the door behind him, and the click of the lock made my heart race. We need to talk, he said, and I nodded, clutching the book I was holding like a shield. About what? I asked, though I knew we both knew what this was about, the tension that had been building, the way we orbited each other, the undeniable pull between us. About the fact that I can't stop thinking about you, Dante said bluntly, moving closer, and there was no hesitation in him now, no uncertainty. About the fact that you've become essential, not just to Luca but to me. About the fact that every time I see you with my son, every time you smile at him or comfort him or make him laugh, I want you more than I've wanted anything in years. The confession was raw, honest, and I should have told him no, should have maintained professional boundaries, should have protected myself. But the truth was that I wanted him too, had wanted him since that first night when he'd stood in Luca's doorway looking like violence and grief personified. This is a bad idea, I said, my voice barely audible, but I was moving toward him even as I said it, drawn by something I couldn't resist. The worst, he agreed, and then his hands were on my waist, pulling me against him, and his mouth was on mine, and the kiss was hungry, desperate, 3 months of tension and desire exploding between us. He tasted like whiskey and dark promises, and his hands were everywhere, sliding into my hair, down my back, pulling me closer until there was no space between us. I kissed him back with equal desperation, my fingers clutching his shirt, and when he lifted me, I wrapped my legs around his waist, and he carried me to the leather couch, laid me down, covered my body with his. We broke apart, both breathing hard, and he was looking at me with eyes so dark they were almost black, and I saw the question in them, the last chance to stop this. Don't think, I whispered, pulling him back down. Just don't think. And he groaned, a sound that was almost pained, and his mouth was on my neck, my collarbone, and his hands were learning my body through my clothes. We didn't go further than kissing, than touching through fabric, but it was enough to change everything, to cross a line we couldn't uncross. Later, we lay tangled together on the couch, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm, and the silence was comfortable, intimate. This complicates things, Dante said quietly, and I felt his words rumble through his chest. Everything about this situation is already complicated, I countered, and he laughed, the sound surprising and warm. Fair point. He shifted, and I looked up at him, and his expression was serious now. I need you to understand something, Elena. My life, my business, it's not clean. I've done things, will continue to do things, that you won't approve of. But everything I do to protect what's mine. My family, my people, Luca. Are you asking for my approval? I asked, and he shook his head. No, he said. I'm asking for your acceptance. I'm asking if you can live with not knowing all the details, with trusting that I'm doing what needs to be done. It should have been a red flag, should have sent me running, but I thought about Luca, about the man I'd watched parent with such fierce love, about the vulnerability he'd shown me, and I nodded. I can live with it, I told him. As long as it doesn't touch Luca, as long as he's safe. He's the safest person in Chicago, Dante said, and there was absolute certainty in his voice, absolute conviction. I've made sure of it. He kissed my forehead, a gesture that was tender and protective, and I understood that I'd been folded into that protection now, that by choosing him, I'd become his to guard. Stay here tonight, he said, and it wasn't quite a command, but not quite a request either, and I nodded, and we stayed tangled together on the couch until we finally moved to his bedroom, and he held me through the night, and I felt safer than I had in years. The next few weeks were a careful dance of maintaining normalcy for Luca while navigating this new reality with Dante. We were discreet, never touching in front of his son, never showing anything beyond professional courtesy, but alone we were insatiable, stealing moments in his office, in my suite, anywhere we could be together. He was an intense lover, demanding and possessive, and he learned my body with the same focus he applied to everything, memorizing what made me gasp, what made me surrender, what broke my control. But it wasn't just physical. We talked for hours, lying in his bed or mine, and he told me about his childhood, about growing up in a family where violence was currency, about taking over his father's business, and trying to legitimize it while still maintaining power. He told me about meeting Isabella at a charity event, about how she was everything good and pure, about how loving her made him want to be better. I'm not a good man, he said one night, his fingers tracing the curve of my hip, but I was a better man with her. And now, with you, I want to be better again. You're already better, I told him. I see it in how you love Luca, in how you're trying to help him heal. That's not nothing, Dante. He kissed me then, soft and sweet, so different from his usual intensity, and I felt myself falling, tumbling into something deep and dangerous and irrevocable. Luca continued to improve, slowly but steadily. He started sleeping through the night, his nightmares becoming less frequent. He laughed more, played more freely, and while he still had hard days, they were becoming the exception rather than the rule. He asked about his mother, but without the same desperate edge, and he was starting to accept that she was gone while still holding on to his love for her. And he was attached to me in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. He called me Elena Mama sometimes, catching himself and correcting it, but I saw Dante's reaction every time, the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes darkened with emotion. 3 months after I arrived, Dante came home in the middle of the day, which was unusual, and there was blood on his shirt collar, barely visible against the black fabric, but I saw it. Marcus was with him, and they disappeared into his office, and I heard raised voices, angry Italian, and then silence. I kept Luca occupied, reading to him in the playroom, but I was distracted, worried, and when Dante finally appeared in the doorway, his face was hard, closed off in a way I hadn't seen since my first day. "We need to talk," he said, and the words were ominous, and he told Luca that he needed to borrow me for a few minutes, and Luca nodded, content to play alone for a bit, and I followed Dante to his office with my heart pounding. Inside, Marcus was there, along with 2 other men I didn't know, and they all looked grim. "There's been a threat," Dante said without preamble, "against me, against my family. Someone's making a move, trying to take territory, and they've specifically mentioned Luca." The fear that flooded through me was primal, protective, and I felt my hands clench into fists. "What does that mean?" I asked, and Dante moved to me, took my hands in his, and his touch grounded me even as his words terrified me. "It means security is being tripled. It means you and Luca don't leave the grounds without my explicit permission. It means I need to handle this quickly and decisively before it escalates." His eyes were hard, dangerous, and I saw the truth of what he was in that moment. Not just a powerful man, but a deadly one, someone who would destroy anyone who threatened what was his. "Is Luca safe?" I asked, because that was all that mattered, and Dante nodded. "He's the safest person in the city," he repeated what he'd told me months ago. "But I need you to be vigilant, to report anything unusual, anyone who seems out of place. Can you do that?" I nodded, understanding that this was the reality of his world, the danger he'd warned me about, and I was choosing to stay anyway, choosing to protect Luca alongside him. The next few days were tense. Security was everywhere, men in dark suits positioned at every entrance, cameras being installed in places I didn't know existed, and Dante was gone more than he was home, taking calls at all hours, disappearing for meetings that he didn't explain. Luca sensed the tension, started having nightmares again, and I spent 2 nights sleeping on the floor of his room, holding his hand when he woke up scared. Dante found us like that on the 3rd morning, me curled up on the plush rug next to Luca's bed, and the expression on his face was complex: gratitude, guilt, love, possession. He helped me up, led me to his room, and we didn't talk, just held each other, and I felt him trembling with exhaustion and stress. "It's handled," he finally said, his voice rough. "The threat is neutralized. It won't touch you or Luca." I didn't ask what neutralized meant, didn't want to know what he'd done, and he didn't offer details. We stayed like that for an hour, just breathing together, and then he kissed me, desperate and claiming, and we made love with an urgency that spoke to how close we'd come to losing this, whatever this was. After, as we lay tangled together, Dante said, "I want you to be mine. Officially. Not just someone living in my house, helping with my son, warming my bed. I want everyone to know that you're under my protection, that you belong to me." The possessive language should have bothered me, should have raised feminist alarm bells, but instead it made me feel safe, claimed, chosen. "What does that mean?" I asked, and he reached for something on his nightstand, and when he turned back, he was holding a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not an engagement ring exactly, but a signet ring in platinum with a subtle M engraved on it, elegant and unmistakable. "This is my family crest," Dante said. "Everyone who matters will recognize it. If you wear this, you're declaring yourself as mine, as under Moretti protection, and no one will touch you." He was watching me carefully, and I understood what he was really asking. Not just to wear his ring, but to commit to this life, to him, to all the darkness and danger that came with it. I thought about walking away, about the life I could have somewhere else, somewhere safe and normal, but then I thought about Luca calling me Elena Mama, about Dante's rare smiles, about the family we'd accidentally built in this beautiful, dangerous house. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff, like free fall, like surrender. Dante slid the ring onto my right hand, and it fit perfectly, and then he was kissing me like I was air and he was drowning, and I kissed him back with equal desperation. That evening at dinner, Luca noticed the ring immediately. "What's that?" he asked, his small finger pointing, and Dante answered before I could. "It means Elena is family now," he said, his voice gentle. "It means she's staying with us forever." Luca's face lit up with joy so pure it hurt to see, and he scrambled out of his chair and threw himself into my arms. "Forever?" he asked, needing confirmation, and I nodded against his hair, breathing in his little boy's scent, feeling my heart crack open completely. "Forever," I promised, and I looked at Dante over Luca's head, and the expression on his face was everything: love, possession, promise, devotion. The months that followed were the happiest of my life despite the underlying danger that I was now aware of. Luca thrived, starting to attend a small private school with enhanced security, making friends, being a normal child in most ways while still carrying his trauma, but learning to live with it. Dante and I became partners in every sense, co-parenting Luca, running the household, sharing a bed every night. He introduced me to his legitimate business associates at charity galas, always with his hand on my back, always making it clear that I was his, and I wore beautiful dresses and the ring that marked me as a Moretti, and I discovered that I liked this life, liked the luxury and the protection and the fierce love of these 2 males. But I also saw more of his other life now, not details, but evidence. Men coming to the house at odd hours, conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, Dante coming home with bruised knuckles, and that hard look in his eyes. I didn't ask questions, kept my promise to accept what I didn't fully understand, but I wasn't naive anymore. I knew what he was, what he did, and I'd made peace with it because the man who terrified half of Chicago was also the man who read bedtime stories in funny voices, who held me through nightmares, who loved his son with a ferocity that was beautiful and absolute. 6 months after I first walked through the gates, Dante took me to dinner at an exclusive restaurant that he owned, and the staff treated us like royalty, and over wine that cost more than my old monthly rent, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Marry me," he said, not a question but a statement, a claiming. And he produced another box, this one containing a diamond so large it was almost obscene, set in platinum that matched my signet ring. Be my wife, Luca's mother, my partner in everything. Let me give you my name, my protection, my everything. I should have thought about it, should have considered the implications, but I already knew my answer, had known it since the moment I'd promised Luca forever. Yes, I said, and Dante slid the ring onto my finger next to the signet, and then he was pulling me to my feet, kissing me in the middle of the restaurant while people politely pretended not to watch, and I felt claimed and chosen and completely, irrevocably his. We told Luca the next morning, and he cried happy tears and asked if this meant I was really his mama now, and I told him yes, if he wanted me to be, and he nodded enthusiastically. Dante watched us with an expression of such profound love and satisfaction that I understood. This was what he'd wanted all along, not just help for his son but a family, a mother for Luca, a partner for himself, someone to rebuild what he'd lost. The wedding was small, just family and close associates, held in the mansion's gardens on a perfect June day. I wore ivory silk, simple and elegant, and Luca was the ring bearer, taking his job so seriously that everyone smiled. Dante wore a black suit that made him look dangerous and beautiful, and when I walked down the aisle toward him, the look in his eyes was possessive and tender and full of promise. We exchanged vows that felt like truth and claiming, and when he kissed me as my husband, I tasted ownership and devotion in equal measure. That night, after the celebration, after Luca was asleep with Maria watching him, Dante carried me over the threshold of the master suite that was officially ours now. He made love to me slowly, thoroughly, mapping my body with his hands and mouth, and he whispered in Italian, words I didn't understand but that sounded like prayers and promises. Later, as we lay tangled together, he traced the rings on my finger, signet and wedding band and engagement diamond, and he said, "You're mine now. Completely. Forever. No one will ever touch you, ever hurt you, ever take you from me." "I'm yours," I agreed, and it felt like truth, like surrender, like the most powerful choice I'd ever made. "And you're mine," I added, because this went both ways, because I'd claimed him just as much as he'd claimed me, and he smiled, dark and satisfied. "Yes," he said, "yours. Only yours." I fell asleep in his arms, in this beautiful, dangerous house, wearing his rings and his name, and I thought about the girl I'd been 6 months ago, broke and desperate and lost, and I barely recognized her. I'd been transformed by this place, by these people, by the choice to stay when I could have run. I was Elena Moretti now, wife to a dangerous man, mother to his broken but healing son, and I wouldn't have changed it for anything, wouldn't have traded this dark, complicated, beautiful life for all the safety and normalcy in the world. In the morning, I woke to find Luca had crawled into bed with us, his small body wedged between Dante and me, and Dante's arm was thrown over both of us, protective even in sleep. Luca's eyes opened, and he smiled at me, that pure, uncomplicated joy of childhood, and he whispered, "Good morning, Mama," and my heart, which I thought was already full, expanded even more. This was my family now, dangerous and complicated and perfect. This was my life, luxurious and uncertain, and exactly what I'd chosen. And as Dante woke and pulled us both closer, as Luca giggled and Dante smiled that rare, genuine smile, I knew with absolute certainty that walking through those gates 6 months ago had been the best mistake I'd ever made, the most dangerous and beautiful beginning I could have imagined. Thank you so much for watching this story. Please subscribe to my channel for more heartfelt and emotional stories like this one. Don't forget to like this video and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Your support truly means the world and helps me create even more amazing content for you. Make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. See you in the next video.